Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're getting into a really useful framework, something that helps organizations, maybe even you, sort of figure out where they stand.
And what might be next for them? We're talking about SWOT analysis.
Exactly. SWOT.
And to make it really concrete, less abstract, we've got a great source lined up. It's an academic paper from the International Journal of Management and Education. Came out in 2016.
Cool.
And it actually used a SWOT analysis to look at internationalization efforts, specifically in Malaysian higher education institutions, or AGIs.
Right. So using a real-world application. Our goal today isn't just, listing findings from a paper.
Yeah.
It's really about using this specific case, these Malaysian universities aiming to go international as a kind of living example.
To really break down what SWOT is, how you actually use it.
And what kinds of things it actually tells you.
Exactly. And we know you're keen to understand SWOT better, maybe so you can explain it to others, perhaps your students.
Yeah, it could be really helpful for that.
So we're trying to tailor this deep dive to give you the clearest possible picture using this example. Think of it like a go-to case study for explaining the framework.
Okay, perfect. Let's dive in then. So first up, we need a little context from the paper itself. What do they mean by internationalization in higher education? Especially thinking about Malaysia here.
Okay, so the source defines it pretty broadly. It's about the exchange of, well, ideas, cultures, knowledge, values,
Right.
all within the university system.
Right.
And it's become a really big global trend, especially since the 80s. It's often seen now as a key sign of quality for a university.
So it's not just about getting international students through the door.
Oh, much more than that. The paper actually makes a point of distinguishing it from globalization.
Okay.
It sees internationalization as the more practical thing, the operational concept within the university. It's about deliberately weaving that international aspect into everything they do.
And they break that down, don't they, into a couple of main types.
Yes, exactly. Two key areas: internationalization at home and cross-border education.
Right. At home is.
That's everything happening on campus. So changes to the curriculum, language programs, how local and international students actually interact day to day.
Got it. And cross-border.
That's the stuff that literally crosses borders. Think student exchange programs, universities setting up campuses overseas, or partnering with foreign unis on programs.
Okay, that makes sense. And the specific background for this study was Malaysia's own national goal, right?
Precisely. Malaysia had this big ambition laid out in their National Higher Education Strategic Plan for 2020
Which was?
to become a major education hub in Southeast Asia. A key part of that was attracting a really large number of international students.
Okay.
So the paper uses SWOT to basically analyze that strategic push, to look at the whole landscape Malaysian universities were operating in as they tried to achieve this.
Which brings us neatly to the framework itself. SWOT.
SWOT, yeah, it's a classic tool. The paper traces its origins back to the 1960s.
Wow, so it's been around a while. Definitely not just a new buzzword.
Not at all.
And its core purpose. What's it for?
Well, it's designed as a mechanism, really, to get a clear picture of an organization
Ow.
by evaluating its internal strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, the inside stuff.
And then the external opportunities and threats it faces, the outside world stuff.
Okay, so it's like a diagnostic tool. You use it to figure out where you are right now, maybe before you even start thinking about strategy.
That's exactly it. The paper really emphasizes this. It comes before you formulate the strategy.
Right.
It helps show the organization's current status, maybe highlights where you need more information, and points towards the big decisions you need to make. It gives you that snapshot of the organization sitting within its competitive environment.
And the framework itself is pretty straightforward, right? Like 4 boxes.
Elegantly simple, yeah. It divides everything into 4 categories based on 2 simple questions. Is it internal to the organization or external?
Okay, internal or external.
And is it positive, so helpful, or negative, potentially harmful?
Which gives us
Yeah.
strengths, that's internal and positive.
Yep. Weaknesses, internal and negative.
Opportunities, external and positive.
And threats, external and negative. And honestly, if you're explaining SWOT to students, that 2x2 grid, internal, external, positive, negative, that's the absolute core. Get that across and everything else follows.
Perfect. Okay, so with that matrix in our heads, let's use this paper on Malaysian HEIs to fill in those boxes.
Yeah.
Start inside the university, the positives, their strengths.
Yeah.
What internal assets did the study find?
Well, one really significant strength was the people.
Okay.
Having higher numbers of staff, students, researchers who've already got international training or experience, that itself contributes to a multicultural vibe on campus. It's an existing internal asset they can build on.
So the talent they already have is a strength.
Uh-huh.
Makes sense. And does having more international students bring financial strengths too?
Oh, absolutely. International students, they often pay higher tuition fees. So the ability to generate income and even save on foreign exchange because the money stays local, that's listed as a clear internal strength, a direct financial plus for the institutions.
And I saw university rankings mentioned in the paper too. Is that considered an internal strength? It feels a bit external.
That's a good point. The paper lists increasing university rankings and international recognition as a strength.
Okay.
And while rankings are based on external comparisons, the actual improvements you need to make to climb those rankings, like better research output, more international collaborations, those are internal efforts. And the reputation you gain from that becomes an internal asset the university holds.
Gotcha. So the reputation they earn is the internal positive.
Yeah.
What about the flow of ideas on campus?
Yeah, that's another one. Creating that knowledge sharing between local and international people right there on campus, that's listed as an internal dynamic, a strength, fostering that cross-cultural learning environment.
Were there strengths tied to their actual courses or programs?
Yes, a couple of things. The fact that study programs naturally differ between countries means Malaysian HEIs can develop unique offerings or find interesting partnership angles. That's leveraging variety internally.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the widespread use of English as the common language of instruction, that's seen as a strength. It motivates local staff and students to boost their English skills, which is an internal capability enhancement.
And what about how the universities themselves operate, their sort of internal drive?
The paper points to the university's own dynamic nature, their focus on innovation. That leads to producing graduates who are more globally aware. So that inherent characteristic, their dynamism, is viewed as an internal strength.
All right, so that gives us a good picture of what's working well within these universities.
Yeah.
Now let's flip the internal coin, the weaknesses.
Yeah.
What internal problems or disadvantages did the paper identify?
Well, a big one, not surprisingly, was resources, specifically a lack of adequate budget. For internationalization activities themselves, for building the right facilities, even for recruiting top-tier international staff, that's a clear internal limitation.
Budget's always tough. What about red tape, processes?
Yeah, that came up. The study highlighted complex and, frankly, tedious bureaucratic procedures.
Ah,
This could be for getting grants approved or even just day-to-day admin stuff. It's an internal inefficiency, a weakness in how they operate.
yeah, I can see how that would just slow everything down. Really frustrating.
Definitely. Another internal weakness was a lack of clarity, like vague definitions of the internationalization strategy among the staff themselves.
So not everyone's on the same page internally.
Exactly. If the vision isn't crystal clear inside the institution, trying to implement it consistently becomes really hard.
Okay. Now, costs came up as a strength with income from international students, but I think the paper also lists cost as a weakness. How does that work?
Yeah, good catch. It's the flip side. Here, the weakness is the high cost for their own Malaysian students wanting to study abroad, or the high cost for the university if they want to set up campuses overseas. It's an internal cost barrier that limits their outward-facing international stuff.
Got it. What about physical things like buildings, equipment?
A lack of equipment and facilities was identified. This could be things like, patchy internet access, maybe outdated classrooms, or not enough cutting-edge research facilities.
And those are tangible internal weaknesses.
Right. They directly impact the quality of education and research they can offer, which then affects how attractive they are internationally.
Were there any issues mentioned about the academic staff, like how involved they were?
The paper did note that not all the international staff they hired were maybe as active in research as hoped, at least when measured by international standards. So that suggests a potential internal weakness in maybe fully integrating or leveraging the academic contributions of their international hires.
Okay. And there was one last one, something about internal competition.
Yeah, this was interesting. The paper identified a potential weakness where internal competition, say, between staff or students, which can sometimes be a good motivator.
Right.
It could actually backfire and hinder knowledge sharing if it becomes too much about rivalry instead of collaboration. It points to a potential flaw in the internal culture or maybe the incentive systems.
Wow. Okay. So looking inward like this, seeing both the strengths, what they do well, and the weaknesses, where they struggle, gives a really honest assessment of their starting point, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And if you were explaining this, you'd stress that these internal factors, S and W, are the things the organization has some degree of control over, things they can potentially build on or try to fix.
That's the key distinction. Spot on. These are largely within their sphere of influence.
Okay.
Now let's switch focus. Let's look outside the university walls, the external environment they're operating in. First, the positives out there, the opportunities. What favorable external conditions or chances did the paper see?
Things like making connections beyond Malaysia.
Precisely. The opportunity for long-lasting international partnerships and collaborations. That could be with other universities or even other types of education providers. It's an external door they can push open.
And improving quality came up internally, but you're saying it's also an external opportunity. How so?
Yes, because engaging internationally gives them the opportunity to improve overall quality.
Ah.
They get exposed to international standards, different practices. This external input can drive internal improvements in curriculum, programs, attracting better staff, better students.
So the external benchmark or interaction provides the chance, the opportunity to lift their internal game.
Exactly. And it's similar with reputation. We said reputation earned is an internal strength.
Right.
But the opportunity lies in how the external world perceives them. Building a better external reputation is an opportunity because that's what attracts top international students and staff from outside.
Okay. What about the wider society?
Social engagement. The chance to interact within an international multicultural society. That's seen as an external opportunity, fostering cross-cultural understanding, not just on campus, but in the wider community where the university sits.
And Malaysia's location itself. That was an
A
opportunity.
huge one. Malaysia's strategic geographic position, that's a purely external factor they can capitalize on. It makes them a naturally attractive destination for students from particular regions, like Southeast Asia and the Middle East.
Technology must be in there somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. A technological development is listed as a big opportunity. It just makes it so much easier to work across borders now.
True.
Plus, it drives innovation in how they teach and research. It's an external trend they can really harness.
And building those global networks you mentioned earlier.
International networking, yeah.
Yeah.
Engaging with partner institutions around the world, getting involved in big international projects or conferences. These are all external activities that open up massive opportunities for growth and collaboration.
Increasing diversity seems like it fits here too.
Definitely. Bringing in staff and students from a wide range of cultural, racial, ethnic backgrounds, that's an external opportunity that fundamentally enriches the internal life and learning environment of the university.
And sometimes competition from outside isn't just bad news. It can be an opportunity.
Well, the paper frames it that way too. Competition from other universities, both domestic and international, is an external factor, sure, but it can also be an opportunity because it pushes Malaysian HEIs to up their game, to improve their own performance just to stay competitive. It can be a driver for positive change.
Okay, so those are the external factors, the wins that could potentially fill their sails.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other side of the external coin, the potential storms, the threats, these are things happening outside their control that could cause real trouble.
Right, the external challenges they face. One threat the paper identified was the potential loss of a clear corporate identity or organizational culture.
How is that an external threat?
Well, it can be threatened by external forces, like maybe having to adapt so much to local laws if they open overseas branches that they lose their core identity. Or just the sheer complexity of operating globally, maybe combined with that internal vagueness about strategy we mentioned earlier.
So external pressures can sort of amplify internal weaknesses.
Precisely, they can interact. Another major external threat is economic, rising tuition fees.
But wait, don't the universities set their own fees? How is that external?
They set the fees, yes, but external market forces matter hugely. What are competitors charging? What are government policies around student loans or funding? These external factors can make their fees a barrier.
Okay.
And studies show that significant fee increases can really hurt international student enrollment. That external market reaction is the threat.
Makes sense. And bigger economic problems like a recession.
An economic crisis is a clear external threat, yeah. It hits potential students' ability to pay, impacts funding like scholarships or loans, and even affects the job market in Malaysia, making it potentially less attractive as a study destination.
Brain drain is always a worry for developing countries, isn't it?
It's a huge external threat for Malaysian HEIs, according to the paper. losing their best academic staff to institutions abroad, places that can offer much higher salaries or maybe better research setups. That's a direct result of competing in a global talent market. They can't control those external offers.
What about funding from the Malaysian government itself?
Decreasing public funding for higher education was listed as a threat. That's a direct external decision policy or economic by the government that squeezes the university's resources, making it harder to fund things like internationalization.
And just the whole global education scene getting bigger and more complex.
Yeah, the progressing globalization of the higher education market itself. It's seen as a threat too. While it brings opportunities, as we said,
Right.
it also massively ramps up the competition and just makes the whole environment much more complex to navigate. It's a fundamental shift in the external landscape they have to deal with.
Wow. Okay. Stepping through the paper's findings, using that SWOT structure, internal versus external, positive versus negative, it really does give you a clear map of a complex situation. It's not just a random list. It's categorized, structured thinking.
That's exactly the power of SWOT. It gives decision makers this organized picture. It helps them really understand the current state of the organization and, just as importantly, the environment it's sitting in.
And this picture, this map, is basically the foundation for deciding what to do next, for strategy.
Absolutely. For the Malaysian HEIs in this study, the analysis clearly flags up. Here are your strengths you can lean into. Here are the weaknesses you really need to fix or manage somehow. Here are opportunities you should try and grab. And here are threats you need to watch out for or actively mitigate.
Right.
And if you're using SWOT for planning, the next step is developing strategies based on how you combine these elements. Like, how can we use our strengths to seize those opportunities? How do we address weaknesses to avoid those threats? That kind of thinking.
So when the paper makes recommendations at the end, those are essentially strategies that flow directly from this SWOT analysis they did.
Precisely. When they recommend things like, say, investing more in student exchange programs, or improving campus facilities, or streamlining visa processes, or boosting staff English skills, or upping the budgets and salaries for international staff,
Yeah.
those are direct responses to the specific points raised in the SWOT. Improving facilities tackles the lack of facilities weakness. Streamlining visas addresses an external hurdle, potentially mitigating a threat or smoothing the path to an opportunity. Increasing salaries might help counter the brain drain threat.
It connects the dots. It turns what could be a jumble of information into actionable categories and helps set strategic priorities. And if you are teaching SWOT, showing how recommendations like those link straight back to specific points in the S, W, O, or T boxes, that's a really powerful way to show the tool's practical value.
Totally. It makes SWOT much less of an abstract exercise and more of a practical input for actual decision making.
Well, we've certainly taken a pretty deep dive here into this specific case, Malaysian HEI internationalization, but really using it as a lens, didn't we, to see the SWOT analysis framework itself in action.
And hopefully, if you've been listening along, you now have a much clearer feel for how that simple 2x2 matrix helps break down a complex reality.
Yeah, into those 4 key buckets. What's good about you internally, what's holding you back internally, what external chances are out there, and what external dangers might be lurking.
Exactly. SWOT.
And the real power of SWOT isn't just making those lists, is it? It's using them to paint that essential picture, the one that guides your decisions and helps you build a strategy. And that applies in any context, really not just universities. It could be a business, a nonprofit, maybe even a personal goal.
It's a surprisingly versatile framework once you get the hang of those 4 components.
Okay, so as a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on, this study, by laying out all these factors for Malaysian AGIs, it kind of highlights an underlying tension, doesn't it?
What tension are you thinking of?
Well, there are the clear economic drivers for internationalization. The income from student fees, boosting rankings to enhance reputation and attract more resources.
And the bottom line stuff.
Right. But then there are also these deeper academic and cultural goals. Things like genuine knowledge sharing, increasing diversity just because it's valuable in itself, improving the overall quality of education and research.
The more idealistic goals, perhaps.
Maybe. So the provocative thought is, how can institutions effectively balance those potentially competing motivations, the economic drivers, versus the academic or cultural ones, especially while they're also constantly dealing with all those external challenges and threats we talked about?
That is a really tricky balancing act. It's dynamic, it's ongoing.
It's a puzzle, isn't it?
It really is, and it's something any organization trying to operate internationally, in any field really, has to constantly wrestle with.
A great point to end on. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive.